Hey everybody, how's it going? We're talking about the Nazis today, so prepare yourselves for that. Specifically, we'll be talking about the name the Nazis gave themselves, the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or NSDAP. NSDAP stands for this, by the way, and I don't know how to pronounce that, so I just put it on the screen instead. So why are we talking about this today? Well, if you're privy to political discourse here in America, you should already know that the word Nazi gets thrown around from time to time. People on the left throw it at the right as a way to call them racist and fascist, while the right throws it at the left to call them authoritarian and intolerant, etc. The more interesting piece of discourse to me here, however, pops up from time to time with some Republican or far-right individuals claiming that the Nazis were left-wing and therefore the Democrats and progressives are Nazis. Now, there are plenty of videos here on YouTube debunking the idea that the Nazis were left-wing, so while I would absolutely love to do a whole video on that, there's another aspect of this argument that I want to look at right now. Generally speaking, when a far-right commentator says that the Nazis were left-wing, they almost always bring up the fact that the Nazis were called the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They then leave that fact hanging there and just move on to the next part of their argument. It's a dangling thread that is left unresolved, and because of that, I want to talk about why the Nazis decided to call themselves the NSDAP and call themselves socialists, even though they vehemently hated socialism. Now, I suppose we should start here by defining what socialism is. Now, we're not going to get too into the weeds here because, look at how many different schools of socialist thought are here on the Wikipedia page, so we're going to go with the most basic and central ideas of socialism. At its core is the concept of social ownership of the means of production, basically meaning that excess product and profit would be distributed among the workers or society as a whole. It's generally viewed as a way of giving workers more power and rights and giving society and its citizens more freedom and rights. Now, how this is played out in practice in the countries that have been called socialist or call themselves socialist is another topic for another day, so for now, just keep this general idea of socialism in your mind. That idea of the expansion of workers' rights and the overall betterment and freedom of society. Keep that in the back of your mind, and now we'll move on to how the Nazi Party began. The beginnings of the Nazi Party are traced back to the end of World War I, the defeat of Germany, and the fall of the German Empire. In early November 1918, the German monarch and aristocracy abdicated the throne under severe pressure from the military and intensifying protests from soldiers and workers, thus ending the German monarchy. In its wake, the Weimar Republic was proclaimed by the Social Democrat Party. However, the transition was anything but peaceful, and throughout late 1918 and early 1919, Germany was plagued with violence and attempted revolts, pitting left-wing communist revolutionaries against right-wing elements and the Social Democrat Party, who was still technically left-wing but wanted to ally with the more conservative elements of Germany to try and prevent a civil war, which then led to the Social Democrats allying with the German army and the Free Corps. In this environment, the new German government was highly suspicious of any group, no matter how small, that gave off the idea of being revolutionary. This takes us to the creation of the German Workers' Party, or the DAP, on January 5, 1919. Later on, in July 1919, Adolf Hitler, still in the military at this time, was part of the military's intelligence apparatus and was tasked to investigate the DAP to see if they were subversive or revolutionary in any way. According to Hitler, his initial impression of the party was that it was rather drab and boring, even if he did agree with the anti-communist and nationalist sentiments of the party. Not yet a member but still attending meetings, on September 12, 1919, Hitler became enraged by a speaker at the party meeting who wanted to break the German state of Bavaria off from Germany. The very idea of this enraged Hitler, who wanted a unified Germany and wanted a unified German Reich and unified German people. After the speaker was thoroughly berated by Hitler, party founder Anton Drexler, apparently impressed by Hitler's speaking skills, encouraged him to join the DAP. Despite Hitler claiming he didn't really want to join the party, he did eventually join the party as member 555. And as a note here, he was actually member number 55. Party number started at 501 to make the party look much bigger than it actually was. Hitler quickly became one of the party's most prominent members due to his speaking ability and would eventually be speaking to an audience several thousand strong by late February 1920. On February 24, 1920, while giving a speech, Hitler announced the party's new 25-point program, and that same day, the party name was officially changed to the NSDAP, thus birthing the Nazi Party as we know it. Now, before I talk about why this was done, I want to quickly talk about Nazi self-promotion and propaganda later on in the 1920s, because it shows how the Nazis went about presenting themselves to Germany. So, in the late 1920s and into the 1930s, the Nazi Party rapidly gained traction across Germany as a sort of catch-all protest party. If you recall, the world plunged into a financial crisis in the form of the Great Depression around this time, so people were angry, and as is often the case, that anger gets directed at the government. So, while in 1928, where the Nazi Party only had 2.63% of the vote, good for just 12 seats in the German government, or the Reichstag, the 1930 election saw them shoot up to 18.25%, good for 107 seats in the Reichstag. The reason people began to flock to the Nazi Party in times of significant hardship was because, to quote Richard J. Evans in The Coming of the Third Reich, Hitler and his party offered a vague but powerful rhetorical vision of a Germany united and strong, a movement that transcended social boundaries and overcame social conflict, a racial community of all Germans working together, a new Reich that would rebuild Germany's economic strength and restore the nation to its rightful place in the world. Even still, rhetorical anger and passion would not be enough to draw in a more wide variety of voters that the Nazis would need to come to power. They don't need a lot of variety, mind you, but they do need just enough political defectors voting for them. That's why, to quote Evans again, the Nazi propaganda apparatus skillfully targeted specific groups in the German electorate, giving campaigners training in addressing different kinds of audience, advertising meetings extensively in advance, providing topics for particular venues, and picking speakers to suit the occasion. Sometimes local non-Nazis and prominent sympathizers from conservative backgrounds shared the platform with the main Nazi speaker. Anti-Semitic slogans would be used when addressing groups to whom they might have an appeal. Where they were clearly not working, they were abandoned. The Nazis adapted according to the response they received. They paid close attention to their audiences, producing a whole range of posters and leaflets designed to win over different parts of the electorate. If we take this idea into account, the reason for the NSDAP incorporating socialism into its name and maintaining the brand of National Socialism throughout its history starts to take shape. It was done to advertise to left-wing elements in Germany. You see, ever since the 1860s in the German Empire, socialist elements have been gaining steam in Germany. However, after two attempted assassinations of Kaiser Wilhelm I, socialism was effectively banned in 1878 by the so-called anti-socialist laws. When the laws were lifted in 1890, the Social Democrat Party quickly rose to be the most voted for party in Germany. They did not take the most Reichstag seats, however, due to how the seats were distributed. From 1890 to 1930, the Social Democrat Party consistently led in the popular vote in each election. In addition to this, the Communist Party, joining the German electorate in 1920, would grow consistently up until 1933 when the Nazis began cracking down on their political opponents after Hitler became Chancellor. In the last free election in November 1932, the Communist Party received 16.9% of the popular vote. Combined with the Social Democrats, major left-wing parties in Germany had 37.3% of the popular vote, more than the Nazis' 33.1%. What I'm getting at here with this is that for decades there was a very strong left-wing socialist movement in Germany that other parties would need to appeal to. For what would eventually become the Nazi Party, presenting socialist elements in their name, promotional material, and symbols would attract the attention of actual socialists in Germany. To quote Hitler in Mein Kampf, "We chose red for our posters after particular and careful deliberation, our intention being to irritate the left, so as to arouse their attention and tempt them to come to our meetings, if only in order to break them up, so that in this way we got a chance of talking to the people. Our meetings suddenly became packed with work people fully 3/4 of an hour before the proceedings were scheduled to begin. These gatherings represented a powder cask ready to explode at any moment, and the fuse was conveniently at hand. But matters always turned out differently. People came as enemies and left, not perhaps prepared to join us, yet in a reflective mood and disposed critically to examine the correctness of their own doctrine. Now, while Hitler saying he was winning over enemies and socialists is likely a bit exaggerated, as this is from his personal biography written by him, it does show a clear purpose to Nazi messaging even when the party was still young. We can take the Nazi flag as a prime example. The striking red color was the color used by socialists and communists, aka the left-wing groups. The swastika was taken from nationalist and often anti-Semitic groups, aka the right-wing groups. The full color palette of the flag, red, white, and black, formed the colors of the Imperial German flag, which would appeal to more conservative and centrist elements of German society. Therefore, the Nazi flag serves as the perfect synthesis of the greater political ideologies in Germany. It perfectly represents the Nazis' aim at advertising to a wide variety of people, pulling in whoever they could. As one last point, we'll return to the 25-point program that was introduced on February 24, 1920. Like the Nazi flag and Nazi messaging, the 25-point program was a synthesis of left and right-wing ideology. We see the clear influence of right-wing, nationalist, racist views in point 4, which reads, "None but members of the nation may be citizens of the state. None but those of German blood, whatever their creed may be. No Jew, therefore, may be a member of the nation." And point 8, which reads, "All immigration of non-Germans must be prevented. We demand that all non-Germans who have immigrated to Germany since 2nd of August, 1914, be required immediately to leave the Reich." And point 23, which reads, "We demand legal opposition to known lies and their promulgation through the press. In order to enable the provision of a German press, we demand that A. All writers and employees of the newspapers appearing in the German language must be members of the race. B. Non-German newspapers be required to have the express permission of the state to be published. They may not be printed in the German language. C. Non-Germans are forbidden by law any financial interest in German publications or any influence on them, and as punishment for violations, the closing of such a publication as well as the immediate expulsion from the Reich of the non-German concerned. Publications which are counter to the general good are to be forbidden. We demand legal prosecution of artistic and literary forms which exert a destructive influence on our national life, and the closure of organizations opposing the above-made demands." On the other hand, we can see points being thrown to the left-wingers and socialists with points like point 11, which reads, "Abolition of unearned, work and labor, incomes. Breaking of debt, interest, slavery." Point 13, which reads, "We demand nationalization of all businesses which have been up to the present formed into companies, trusts." Point 14, which reads, "We demand that the profits from wholesale trade shall be shared out." And point 17, which reads, "We demand a land reform suitable to our needs, provision of a law for the free expropriation of land for the purposes of public utility, abolition of taxes on land, and prevention of all speculation in land." As a whole, the official party platform reads as a synthesis of racist nationalism and revolutionary socialism. However, as many historians have pointed out, a great deal of these party ideas, especially the more socialist-sounding ones, were ignored, even though Hitler declared the program to be unchangeable. The Nazis engaged extensively in slave labor in the concentration camps, but maybe because those in the camps were German enemies or people they didn't like, it didn't count. Maybe that would be the reasoning if Hitler were questioned on that point, but regardless, the nationalization of all businesses never occurred. In fact, the Nazis engaged in extensive privatization in order to boost economic production. There was, of course, no profit sharing. There was also child labor of German citizens, at least technically, towards the end of the war, with children and teenagers being conscripted into the German military. In general, as well, workers' rights were significantly curtailed in favor of the rights of the employer. For example, each worker had a workbook that he needed to be hired. If an employer so pleased, he could keep the worker's workbook and prevent the worker from leaving and finding another job. It was basically forced labor. Any of the points that could have been appealing to socialists were effectively ignored, while the more nationalist right-wing ideas like points 4, 8, and 23 were at least put into motion, if not fully enacted. So, if we take everything into account here, why did the Nazis call themselves socialists? Simply put, it was a marketing ploy. An attempt to bring in people that normally wouldn't associate with them and, in most cases, would actively fight against them. It was an attempt to trick people into aiding Hitler and his quest for power. As soon as the Nazis came to power, they began stamping out any elements of socialism and communism and destroying the rights of the worker. It was effectively just a trick meant to fool left-wingers and socialists into joining the Nazi Party, and little more than that. Alrighty, I think that's where we'll stop for now, and thank you all for listening and watching. If you liked the video, be sure to comment and subscribe, and hit the bell. Tell a friend, maybe tell a stranger. They surely won't think you're weird for walking up to them, talking about the Nazis, then saying subscribe to a YouTube channel. It's not weird in any way. But anyway, I hope you tune in for the next video I make, and I hope you learn something. Bye!